They tried to take my house, but I turned the table so hard, the entire HOA board fell apart. You won't believe what happened when I exposed them on live TV. In this video, you're going to hear the full story of how one quiet homeowner, me, took on a powerful, corrupt HOA and exposed everything they tried to hide. From secret deals to illegal fines, this journey has it all: betrayal, justice, and the moment they realize they messed with the wrong person. You'll learn how I caught them red-handed, the explosive evidence that brought them down, how the community fought back, and how you can protect yourself from HOA abuse. So, make sure to watch till the end, because trust me, you don't want to miss the final twist. Thank you for your amazing comments. I read every single one, and I appreciate your support so much. If you'd like to support the channel, just leave a like and hit that subscribe button. It takes less than a second and helps more than you know. Now, let's get back to the important and necessary information. I never thought a piece of paper could shake the foundation of my life. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, tucked inside my mailbox like any other piece of mail. A plain envelope, no return address. The kind you'd toss aside without a second thought. But something about it made me pause. Maybe it was the way my name was written in bold black ink. Maybe it was a faint scent of ink and formal hostility that seemed to drift off the page. I tore it open while still standing at the mailbox, the early autumn wind biting at the edges of my sleeves. The heading said, "Notice of violation. Immediate action required." I blinked. Violation? For what? I looked around my property. The lawn was freshly cut, the flower beds neatly mulched, and the porch was spotless. Nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing wrong. I read on. Dear Mr. Callahan, according to Article 14, Section B of the Ridgewood Pines Homeowners Association bylaws, your front-facing windows do not comply with community aesthetic standards due to presence of visible solar screen mesh. You are hereby issued a warning and fine of $150. Failure to remove or replace the screens within 10 business days will result in escalating penalties, including but not limited to legal action and potential lien placement. My stomach dropped. Solar screens? Are you kidding me? I had installed those screens to reduce heat and cut energy costs. No one said a word about it. Until now. And that was just the beginning. I folded the letter slowly, trying to keep my hands from shaking. Not from fear, but from something else entirely. Confusion? Frustration? Maybe a bit of both. I took one last look at the front of my house. The windows stared back at me, calm and clean. The solar screens were a soft charcoal color, barely noticeable from the curb. If anything, they looked sleek and modern. I had installed them myself just 4 months ago, and no one had said a word, not the neighbors, not the HOA. Not until now. I walked back inside, dropped the letter on the kitchen counter, and stared at it like it might burst into flames. The Ridgewood Pines HOA. I'd heard stories about them, of course. Everyone in the neighborhood had. They were the reason Jacob from 2 blocks down had to repaint his house twice in the same year. The reason me as kids couldn't leave their bikes out for more than 30 minutes. The reason Mrs. Alford's wind chimes, her late husband's wind chimes, had been forcibly removed in the middle of the night. Everyone feared them, but I hadn't paid them much mind before. I kept my yard tidy, paid my dues on time, didn't host loud parties. In my mind, I was invisible to them, boring and obedient enough to be left alone. Apparently, that illusion was over. By evening, I had read and reread the letter a dozen times. Each time, it stung a little more. It wasn't just a fine or the ridiculous rule. It was a threat, legal action, and potential lien placement. They weren't playing games. They were coming for my home, over window screens. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, HOA bylaws on one tab, and a glass of whiskey in my hand. I was looking for the clause, Article 14, Section B, and when I found it, my heart sank. There it was in stiff legalese. All exterior window treatments visible from the street must conform to the Ridgewood Pines community color palette and design standards. Dark mesh coverings that obscure uniform visibility may be subject to board review and removal. Subject to board review, not automatic violation. Not immediate fine, just subject to review. So why had I received a warning and a $150 fine? With no notice, no hearing, no board vote, something didn't add up. And that's when the spark lit. This wasn't just a letter. It was a warning shot, one of many to come. And if they thought I was going to just fold and roll over, they didn't know who they were messing with. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. Not because of an alarm, but because something inside me had switched on a quiet intensity that wouldn't let me rest. I wasn't just going to remove the solar screens. I was going to find out why this was happening. I spent the morning combing through every document the HOA had ever sent me, newsletters, policy updates, meeting minutes. Most it was filler, reminders about pet leash rules and lawn maintenance. But buried in a quarterly notice from last year was something interesting. A name I hadn't seen before. Margaret Dalton, newly elected HOA president as of last fall. According to the notice, she had promised to bring a stronger vision of visual uniformity to Ridgewood Pines. Whatever that meant. I didn't recognize her name, so I pulled up the HOA website. There she was, President Margaret Dalton, a stern-looking woman in her early 60s, gray hair swept back in a tight bun. Lips pursed in the official photo, like someone had asked her to smile, and she just couldn't manage it. Below her name was her title and favorite quote. Order reflects pride. Pride reflects strength. I leaned back in my chair. Margaret didn't look like someone who appreciated flexibility. She looked like someone who made rules to break people, not just to protect the neighborhood. By noon, I decided I needed to talk to someone who might know more about what was really going on. I walked down to Jacob's house. He was outside, working on his truck, his hands covered in grease. "Hey," I called out. He looked up, smiled faintly. "Hey, Alex. What's up? I got one of those letters," I said. His smile disappeared. "Let me guess. A violation." "Yep. Solar screens." He cursed under his breath and wiped his hands on a rag. "You too, huh? What do you mean?" He tossed the rag onto the hood of the truck and motioned me closer. "You're not the first. This past month alone, 4 of us on this side of the neighborhood have gotten hit with violations. All weird stuff. Samantha got dinged for having a non-compliant garden trellis. Frank's mailbox was too ornate. Even Kim's driveway paint was too light in shade." I blinked. "Since when are they enforcing this aggressively?" "Since Margaret took over," he said. "She's running the HOA like it's a private militia. Nobody voted for her. She was appointed after the last guy had to step down. Health reasons, supposedly." I raised an eyebrow. "Supposedly?" Jacob shrugged. "All I know is 1 month he's president, the next month she is, and everything's changed." A cold breeze slid through the air. The sun was out, but the chill cut deeper than it should have. "So, what are people doing about it?" I asked. He gave a dry laugh. "Nothing. No one wants to get on her radar. You push back, and she'll find 10 more reasons to fine you." I crossed my arms. "That doesn't sound legal." Jacob looked at me with something between admiration and warning. "Doesn't mean it won't happen." I left his house with a lot on my mind. What if Margaret wasn't just enforcing rules? What if she was targeting people? And if so, why me? I didn't have the answer yet, but I was about to find it. 2 days after first letter, another envelope arrived. This time, it was hand-delivered. A single sheet of crisp white paper, sealed with the HOA's official stamp. Inside was a second violation notice, this time for excessive deviation from law and regulation. Apparently, the edge of my grass line did maintain a visually harmonious blend with the property next door. I read it 3 times just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. This was harassment. I stepped outside and looked at the grass line between my yard and my neighbor's, Mrs. Atwood. We were talking maybe a 2-inch difference in how her grass had grown over the curb. 2 inches. Mrs. Atwood herself was out front tending to her roses. She waved, her gentle smile softening the morning haze. "Lovely morning, Alex." I held up the letter. "Did you report this?" She looked at the paper, then at the lawn and frowned. "No, of course not. Why would I? Everything looks fine to me." Exactly what I thought. Back inside, I laid both letters side by side on the dining room table. This wasn't enforcement. It was intimidation. And I wasn't the only one. The community Facebook page was suddenly flooded with quiet complaints. Stories about phantom violations. Notes about Margaret showing up unannounced to inspect properties. There was even a photo of her measuring someone's fence with a tape measure at 6:45 in the morning. Something had to give, so I called the HOA office. Ridgewood Pines Homeowners Association. This is Linda. Hi, Linda. I said as politely as I could. This is Alex Callahan, Lot 38. I received 2 violation notices this week, and I need to speak with Margaret Dalton directly. There was a pause. Mrs. Dalton doesn't typically take calls from homeowners unless it's during the scheduled open forum. I'm not asking for forum, I said. I'm asking for 5 minutes of her time. Another pause. She's very busy. Linda. She's threatening legal action over a piece of mesh and a lawn edge. I think 5 minutes is the least she can offer. She sighed. I'll see what I can do. Please hold. I waited. 3 minutes. 5. Then 10. The music looped through the same gentle piano melody, like it was trying to soothe me into giving up. Finally, Linda came back. Mrs. Dalton is unavailable this week, but she recommends that you submit a formal appeal in writing. You can email the address listed at the bottom of your notice. Click. No offer of resolution. No hearing. Just a wall. So, I did what I always do when pushed. I fought back, with facts. I spent the next 3 days documenting everything. I took photos of my lawn, of the solar screens, of the measurements between my yard and my neighbors. I cross-referenced every policy I could find in the HOA's public charter. I even started compiling a spreadsheet of every neighbor I could talk to who had a similar experience. And then, something strange happened. One of my neighbors, Tom, 2 doors down, texted me late that night. You didn't hear this from me, but Margaret's trying to pass a private motion to begin property seizures against non-compliant homes. They want to buy out properties they find too often to sell. Call me tomorrow. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about me. This was a plan. They were targeting certain homeowners, those who didn't fit the mold, those who couldn't afford to keep paying fine after fine, until they either sold or were forced out. And now, they were coming for my home. Sleep was a joke that week. My nights were filled with restless pacing and late-night deep dives into real estate law, HOA overreach cases, and civil rights in privately governed communities. I learned more about HOA bylaws than any normal person ever should. But one thing became clear. Most homeowners folded under pressure. They paid the fines, trimmed their bushes, repainted their doors, and never questioned the system. That's what the HOA counted on, compliance through exhaustion. But I wasn't like most homeowners. At 2 a.m. on a Thursday, I opened a blank document on my laptop, cracked my knuckles, and began writing a formal appeal laced with legal precedent, documentation, and photos. It was sharp, professional, and most importantly, angry in all the right places. I attached everything, screenshots from the bylaws, photos of my perfectly compliant solar screens, neighbor testimonials. I printed it, bound it, and hand-delivered it to the HOA office the next morning, time-stamped and signed. I didn't stop there. That night, I hosted a small gathering in my backyard. Just neighbors. No cameras. No public rants. Just a quiet, honest conversation. A dozen people showed up. Some brought their letters. Some brought wine. Some brought years of pent-up frustration. I've lived here for 12 years, said Mr. Khan. Not once have I been late on dues. And last week, I got fined for leaving my trash bins out 10 minutes past pickup. She called my wreath excessively decorative, said Claire. It was a fall wreath. My son got a violation for chalk art, Mia added, her voice rising. Sidewalk chalk. What kind of place hates sidewalk chalk? As each person shared their story, the dots began to connect. This wasn't about aesthetics. This was about control. And then someone dropped a bombshell. I work in the assessor's office, said Juan, one of the newer neighbors, and I pulled some recent land ownership records on a hunch. You know who's been quietly buying up foreclosed homes in this area? We all learned in Margaret Dalton and a company called Pinecrest Holdings. Guess who owns it? No one breathed. Her son. The room fell into stunned silence. That was it. The game wasn't about rules. It was about profits. Margaret and her allies were weaponizing the HOA to force non-compliant homeowners out, so they could scoop up undervalued properties. I looked around at my neighbors. Ordinary people. Tired. Angry. Ready? This ends now, I said. They nodded. The next morning, we filed a petition with 48 signatures demanding an emergency HOA board meeting. And in the meantime, I had a surprise plan for Margaret, one she wouldn't see coming. The day of the emergency meeting arrived faster than I'd expected. With my petition in hand, 48 signatures in support, and all the evidence I gathered, I walked into the HOA office feeling something I hadn't in a long time: hope. The boardroom was cold, too bright. The long wooden table was polished to a mirror-like shine, reflecting the emptiness that seemed to hang in the air. But I wasn't there to admire the decor. I was there to get answers. I wasn't alone either. My neighbors had all shown up, quietly taking their seats behind me, lining the back wall like silent soldiers ready for battle. There was a tension in the room, an electric buzz that only got louder as the clock ticked toward 10 a.m. The doors swung open, and in walked Margaret Dalton, flanked by a few of her board members. Her stern face and sharp eyes met mine, and I could practically feel the icy tension between us. But I held my ground. I was done being intimidated. "Mr. Callahan," she said, her voice as cold as I'd imagined, "I understand you've requested an emergency meeting. I hope you have a valid reason for disrupting our scheduled agenda." I didn't flinch. "I'm here because you've been violating the rights of homeowners in Ridgewood Pines. You've been using the HOA to push people out of their homes, and I'm not on standby while you do it." A murmur ran through the room, but Margaret's glare silenced everyone. "Your accusations are serious, Mr. Callahan," she said, stepping forward and setting a thick folder down on the table in front of me. "If you have proof, I suggest you provide it. If not, we'll consider this meeting closed." I took a deep breath, flipping open the folder I brought with me. The table fell silent as I spread out the photos, the documents, the emails. One by one, I laid out everything. The solar screen violation? "Here's my proof that it meets every requirement in the HOA's own guidelines," I said, slamming down a set of photos, showing the screens were fully compliant. "Here's a photo of Mrs. Atwood's lawn, side by side with mine. Same grass height, same edging. Yet, I've been fined and she hasn't. Do you want me to continue?" I looked around the table. I saw a few faces start to look uneasy. One of the board members, a man named Gerald, shifted in a seat. He knew something wasn't right. "But it doesn't end there," I continued, voice growing louder. "You're not just targeting people with minor violations. You've been systematically increasing fines and using those fines to pressure homeowners into selling. Here's a list of homes bought out by Pinecrest Holdings, all within the past 6 months. I slid the list across the table. Margaret's face paled for just a moment, but she recovered quickly, clearing her throat and glancing at the other board members. "You have no idea what you're talking about," she said, trying to sound composed but failing to hide the nervous tremor in her voice. "These are all legitimate fines." "Legitimate?" I scoffed. "You fine someone for having a non-compliant garden trellis. That's a joke, and you know it." I paused, letting the room sit in the heavy silence I created. There was no way she could talk her way out of this one. I had the evidence. I had the support of the community, and I was ready to take her down. Just as she opened her mouth to respond, I made my next move. "I've also filed a complaint with the state's Department of Fair Housing and Residential Communities," I said, a grin creeping onto my face. "They're aware of what's happening here. They're already investigating the potential violations of state law regarding these unethical practices. So, if you want to continue the charade, I'll see you in court." Margaret's face twisted in fury. For the first time, she looked vulnerable. The room was still, everyone waiting for her next move. The other board members were visibly uncomfortable, exchanging glances. "I'm sure the board would appreciate some time to review the evidence," said Gerald, his voice shaky. Perhaps we should recess for a bit. Margaret glared at him, then at the rest of the board. Her hands shook slightly as she folded them on the table. Fine, she spat, her voice cold and dismissive. We'll take a short recess. But don't think for a second that this is over. I nodded. We'll see. As the board members filed out of the room, I exchanged looks with my neighbors. There was a quiet but powerful sense of victory in the air. We had made our point, and I was just getting started. The battle had only just begun. But Margaret Dalton had no idea what was coming next. The tension in the room after the recess was palpable. Margaret, normally poised and in control, was now visibly rattled. I could tell she was running through damage control in her head, but she wasn't quite sure how to handle someone who had turned the tables on her so completely. As the board members trickled back into the room, the air was thick with uncertainty. I wasn't done yet, though, not by a long shot. Once everyone was seated, I stood again, this time with a calm but deliberate confidence. I'm not here to waste anyone's time, I said, locking eyes with Margaret. I'm here because it's become crystal clear that the HOA under your leadership has strayed far beyond its mandate, and I intend to make sure everyone knows what's really going on behind closed doors. Margaret opened her mouth to protest, but I raised a hand, signaling her to stop. The petition I submitted, the complaints from other homeowners, the evidence I provided, all of it points to one thing: systematic manipulation to force homeowners out of their properties, using fines and legal threats as weapons. I continued. This isn't about maintaining property values or keeping our neighborhood aesthetically pleasing. It's about making money by forcing people to sell. The board was silent, all eyes on Margaret, who was now visibly sweating. I could see the sweat glistening on her forehead, her fingers nervously tapping the table. She was losing control of the situation, and I had no intention of letting her regain it. I took a deep breath and shifted the conversation to what I'd been preparing for days. The media. I've taken the liberty of contacting a few local news outlets, I said, flashing a sly smile. They're very interested in what's happening here, and I've made sure they're aware of the facts. I've also spoken to a few investigative reporters who specialize in HOA corruption. I'm sure they'd love to look into this. Margaret froze. I could see the realization dawn on her face. She knew what I meant. Public scrutiny was the last thing she wanted. She thrived on the quiet, unseen control of Ridgewood Pines. She had power because no one questioned her. But now, I had turned the spotlight onto her, and it was only a matter of time before the public began asking questions. We don't need to drag this into media, one of the board members, a woman named Karen, said nervously, her voice betraying her fear. Let's just find a way to resolve this quietly. Margaret shot her a sharp look. Karen, let me handle this. But it was too late. The damage had been done. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, sensing that Margaret's grip on the situation was slipping. I'm not backing down, I said, my voice firm and resolute. We deserve answers. We deserve transparency. And we deserve to be treated with respect, not as pawns in a game of financial gain. I turned to the rest of the board. I'm giving you two options. Either we resolve this issue and stop these illegal tactics, or I'll make sure every news outlet in this town knows exactly what you've been up to. I'll expose every last one of you. Silence hung in the air. Then, slowly, one of the board members, Gerald, spoke up. Margaret, this has gone too far, he said, his voice low. I didn't sign up for this. We need to address the public's concerns. Margaret's eyes flared with anger, but the damage was done. The board members were no longer on her side. They could see which way the wind was blowing, and they knew it wasn't in their favor. Fine, Margaret spat, her voice cold and sharp. We'll put this to a vote. But don't think this is over, Mr. Callahan. You'll regret this. I smirked. I doubt it. As the meeting dragged on, it became clear that Margaret's position was crumbling. The board finally agreed to form a committee to look into the allegations I'd raised. It wasn't a full victory, but it was a step in the right direction. They agreed to a public forum where I could present my case to the rest of the neighborhood. I walked out of that meeting feeling like I had just won a major battle. But I knew the war was far from over. This was just the beginning. The victory from the HOA meeting was short-lived. As I walked back to my home, a sense of urgency settled over me. The HOA was a powerful machine. I had shaken its gears, but I needed more than just a committee to stop Margaret. It was time to go public in a way they couldn't ignore. I pulled out my phone and sent a few texts to the reporters I'd been in touch with earlier. By the end of the evening, I had a meeting scheduled with a local investigative journalist, Heather Thompson, who had covered several corruption stories in the past. I'm going to make sure the whole town knows about Margaret's tactics, I said to myself, a grin spreading across my face. Let's see how the HOA handles the truth coming to light. The next few days felt like a blur. What had begun as a quiet fight between a homeowner and a neighborhood association was about to turn into something much bigger, and I wasn't going to back down. I spent the evening preparing for the interview with Heather Thompson, the investigative reporter I'd been in touch with. Heather was well known for digging deep into stories involving corruption, injustice, and corporate malfeasance. She was the kind of journalist who didn't back down when she smelled a scandal. If there was anyone who could help me shine a light on the HOA's misdeeds, it was her. As I sat at my kitchen table, I went over my notes one last time. I had pages of evidence, detailed accounts from my neighbors, and even a few internal emails I had managed to acquire through various sources. These emails, containing disturbing exchanges between Margaret Dalton and a few developers who had bought homes in the neighborhood, were the smoking gun. They revealed a clear pattern of collusion, and I knew they were the key to bringing the whole operation down. Just as I was preparing to head out, my phone buzzed. It was Heather, confirming our meeting. Meet me at the diner on Main. I'll be there at 10 a.m. sharp. Bring everything you've got. We're going to make this a big story. Her message read. I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. It was time to take the fight to the next level. The following morning, I arrived at the diner early, feeling a mix of excitement and anxiety. The place was a typical small-town spot, cozy with red vinyl booths, a coffee pot always full, and the smell of bacon wafting through the air. Heather was already sitting in a booth by the window, a notebook in front of her, her eyes scanning the room. "Alex Callahan?" she asked, looking up with a smile. "That's me," I replied, extending my hand. She shook it firmly, her gaze sharp. She wasn't here to play nice. She was here to get the story. I slid into the booth across from her and pulled out the folder of evidence I'd compiled over the last few days. Her eyes lit up as she flipped through the pages, pausing on certain documents and photos that clearly caught her attention. "You're right," she said after a moment. "This is big. This isn't just a case of a rogue HOA board trying to enforce arbitrary rules. This is organized, calculated behavior that's affecting an entire community. If we go public with this, it's going to shake Ridgewood Pines to its core." I nodded, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. I want to make sure everyone knows what's happening. I don't want anyone else to fall victim to the same tactics they use on me and my neighbors. Heather looked up, her expression serious. "I'll get my team on it. We'll run an in-depth investigation and publish a piece. But I'll need your cooperation. I'll need you to go on record, give us an interview, and let us show the public exactly what's been going on." I took a deep breath. "You have it. I'm all in." She smiled, then glanced at the clock. "All right, let's get to work." Over the next few days, I worked closely with Heather and her team to gather more evidence, conduct interviews with other residents, and uncover even deeper layers of the HOA's corruption. The more we dug, the more we found shady business dealings, overblown fines, and a network of developers who have been buying up homes through backdoor deals. We discovered that Margaret Dalton was not just the head of the HOA. She had personal financial stakes in some of the developments that were being approved in Ridgewood Pines. She was using her position to manipulate the system for her own benefit. I couldn't believe it. The depths of her deception were worse than I'd imagined. The day Heather's article was set to be published, I sat at home, anxiously refreshing my browser. It felt like hours, but in reality, it had only been minutes since she told me it would go live at 9 a.m. My phone buzzed, and I immediately opened it. Breaking news: corruption revealed. HOA board's malpractice uncovered in Ridgewood Pines. The headline was bold, direct, and screamed for attention. I clicked the link, my heart racing as I read through the article. Every word felt like a victory. Heather had nailed it. She didn't just cover the fines and violations, but also exposed the board's connection to a real estate syndicate that was secretly buying up property in Ridgewood Pines. The article also included interviews with me and my neighbors, giving first-hand accounts of the abuses we'd endured. And then, at the very end of the article, was a powerful quote from me. This is not just about property rights. This is about justice. This is about making sure the people who are supposed to protect us don't become the very ones who take advantage of us. I sat back in my chair, feeling a rush of pride. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was the fight of every person in Ridgewood Pines who had been wronged by the HOA. The publication of the article had an immediate and explosive impact. Within hours, the story was shared across social media. Local news stations began reporting on it, and calls started flooding into the HOA's office. Margaret and her board members were not prepared for backlash. It was as if a dam had burst. They were no longer the faceless authority in the neighborhood. They were public figures under scrutiny, their every move being watched. As the days passed, the pressure mounted. There were protests outside the HOA office, petitions circulating to dissolve the board, and even local government officials offering to step in and investigate further. Margaret and the others tried to put up a defense, but it was clear they were losing control. The final blow came when the state attorney general's office launched an official investigation into the HOA's practices. Margaret was forced to step down temporarily, and several other board members resigned in disgrace. The media had a field day with the story, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. It wasn't just about the fines. It wasn't even about winning the battle. It was about standing up for what was right and making sure that no one else would ever have to go through what we did. But the battle wasn't over yet. There were still more people to expose, more corruption to uncover, and I was ready to keep fighting. The morning after Heather's expose went live, I awoke to the sound of my phone buzzing nonstop. Text after text, voicemail after voicemail, email after email. Some were neighbors I barely knew. Others were reporters, legal professionals, even HOA board members from neighboring towns asking for advice. And all of them were reacting to one thing: the fall of Margaret Dalton. The headline was still trending on every local news site. HOA leader resigns amidst corruption scandal in Ridgewood Pines. For months, maybe years, Margaret had ruled our community with an iron grip wrapped in a velvet glove. But now, she was exposed. She had resigned late the night before, claiming personal reasons in an email blast to the HOA mailing list. No apology, no responsibility, just a hasty retreat from the empire she tried to build. But I knew that wasn't the end. That was just the toppling of the first domino. The HOA office became a circus overnight. A local TV station parked a news van out front. Protesters lined the sidewalk with signs reading, "Not my HOA. Where's our money? Transparency now." Several homeowners began coming forward with stories eerily similar to mine. People fined for arbitrary violations, pressured to sell, ignored or threatened when they challenged the board. One woman, Mrs. Lopez, revealed that Margaret had threatened her with foreclosure over garden gnomes, only to find out later her home had been earmarked by a developer. And then came the bombshell. One of the former HOA treasurers, a soft-spoken man named Brian Monroe, broke his silence. He turned over financial records to the media and to the Attorney General, records that showed a secret account labeled Neighborhood Reserve, which had been used to fund trips, dinners, and consulting fees that were anything but official. The community was furious, betrayed, and ready to take action. A special meeting was called at the Ridgewood Pines Community Center. It was the largest turnout in HOA history, standing room only. I sat in the front row, flanked by Heather and several neighbors who had become unexpected allies in this whole saga. Gerald, the only remaining board member with a shred of integrity, took the stage. Effective immediately, he said, the current Ridgewood Pines HOA board is dissolved. A community-led task force will assume oversight while we conduct elections and complete the state investigation. The crowd erupted into cheers. People cried, hugged, some laughed in disbelief. Then Gerald did something I never expected. He called me up to the mic. I hesitated, but the room was already chanting, "Alex, Alex, Alex." I took the mic, heart pounding. "I didn't want to start a war," I said. "But sometimes the only way to fix something broken is to shine a light on it. This community deserves leaders who serve, not rule, who listen, not threaten. Let's build something better together." The room roared. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Weeks passed. The investigations continued, but so did the rebuilding. Elections were held, and the new board was made up of everyday residents, retirees, young couples, veterans, teachers, and me. Yeah, they voted me in. Reluctantly at first, but I accepted, because I knew I couldn't just tear something down. I had to help rebuild it right. One of the first things we did, ban excessive fines. Then we opened the books, started monthly town halls. No secrets, no power plays. The neighborhood began to change. Yards once silenced by fear now blossomed with personality. Kids played freely again. Neighbors smiled instead of whispered. Ridgewood Pines became more than development. It became a real community. People still ask me why I did it, why I fought so hard over something as simple as a fence, a lawn, a few fines. But it was never just about that. It was about dignity, about fairness, about the right to feel safe in your own home. And as for Margaret, well, last I heard, she'd moved to another town. Rumor has it she's trying to join another HOA board. But I have faith that someone out there, someone like me, will stand up to her again. Because once people know their power, it's hard to take it away.